Hi gardeners, it's Miss Chrissy, and today I'm going to talk to you about pollination, pollinators, and butterflies. We actually did this lesson last week, but unfortunately my recording didn't work, so I'm just having to re-record it in my little classroom studio here. So what I wanted to do was start off talking about the life cycle. So if you think about kind of the earth or our environment at a large scale, you might think of the life cycle as how different plants and animals interact with each other. So if you started with soil, for example, and a plant grew from the nutrients that are contained in the soil, then there are animals, omnivores and herbivores, that can come along and get nutrients from the plant. So they'll eat the plants, get energy, and then they become prey for predators that are either omnivores or carnivores, and then they will consume and get energy from those animals. And then whether it's basically just leftovers or plants and animals that die and start to decay, those pieces, that the energy from those dead materials are then consumed by our composters. So it could be worms or fungi or bacteria, and they're going to break those materials down and return those nutrients to the soil so that we can start that whole cycle over again. And that's how life is working over and over again. We're going through and reusing the energy from all of these different resources. If we look at the life cycle a little bit more narrowly towards plants, what we would do is we would have a seed. And that seed is going to grow into a plant. And that plant will then produce a flower. And the goal of the plant in the end is to produce more seeds. So that flower needs to get pollinated. So we'll do pollination here. And then if it is pollinated, it can get fertilized and then produce a new seed. Okay. Actually, this picture I'm going to replace here. Okay, so we will call this the seed. This is the plant. This is pollination. This is fertilization. And then back to the seed again. So in order to understand this process a little bit better, because in order for us to get new seeds, like I said, our plants, the goal is for the plant to produce more seeds. But that doesn't happen unless this entire cycle takes place. So when you get to pollination, you need to kind of understand the parts of the flower to see how that's going to happen. Because if pollination happens, then fertilization can happen. They can't happen without each other. So let's take a look. I have a book here. It's Oh Say Can You Seed by Bonnie Worth. It's one of the Cat in the Hat Learning Library books. And I'm not going to read the book. There's actually a recording of this on our YouTube channel. But I did want to point out this picture because this is a great diagram of a flower. So here you'll see that there are parts that you probably recognize. You'll see a little leaf off to the side there. You have the petals of the flower. But inside the center of the flower, there are some very important parts for pollination. So first off, we have the stamen. These are the multiple little, I'm going to call them tentacles, but they're little, they're long parts that have almost like a little foot at the end. And on that little foot, there is pollen. And pollen is what is needed in order to fertilize the eggs in order to make seeds. So where are the eggs? Well, the eggs are inside this long tube, which is called the pistil. So the pollen needs to travel from the stamen over to the pistil, and that would be pollination. If the pollen then travels down the pistil to the ovules, which are these tiny little round things here at the bottom, those are the eggs. And those eggs will not produce seed unless they are fertilized by the pollen. So the pollen has to make it from the stamen to the pistil, travel down the pistil to the ovule, and that's how it then fertilizes those eggs and the seed is grown, okay? So when you look at an actual flower, oftentimes you're not going to be able to see some of these parts because they're pretty small. But I do have a pretty large lily here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just point out these parts. So here, these long these long ones here that have almost a little foot at the top, these are the stamens. And if you look really closely, hopefully my camera will capture it, you'll see there's some fuzzy kind of brownish orange stuff on those stamens. And that is the pollen for this plant. So what we need in order for this plant to produce seed, we need that pollen to travel from the stamen over to this pistil, which is this long piece right here. And you'll see if you look at the stamen head on, you can't really see inside, but you'll see that there is almost like an opening in the middle there. And that is where the pollen is going to travel down. And then the ovules are going to be at the base. So they're going to be down very low here. And I have another plant that I'll take apart in a moment to show you. So if I have a small home garden and I wanted this flower to produce seed, I could take, typically flowers need to be pollinated from pollen from a different flower or plant. So I would take a stamen from another plant, come over, and I could just rub it onto the pistil and I could pollinate the plant by hand. Problem is that if I have a large farm and I need to pollinate many fruiting or vegetable plants, I'm not going to be able to do that by hand. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to take this stamen and I'm going to rub it there on the pistil, and you can see that the pollen, just with a very light touch, has rubbed off on the pistil. And so I have helped in transferring the pollen from the stamen to the pistil and achieving pollination. Now, like I said, if I have a large farm, I'm not going to be able to do that manually for every single plant, every single flower on my farm. I'm not going to produce a whole lot. So I'm going to need help from other creatures in order, and not even just creatures, but from nature in general, in order to pollinate my plants. So sometimes pollination can happen just by the wind or water, but most often it's going to happen with the assistance of creatures, all right? So those creatures, most people think of, when they think of pollination, they think of bees. And that is because a large portion, I think like 90% of the flowering plants are pollinated by bees. And there's 20,000 different species of bees in the world. But there are other creatures that help with pollination as well. We'll make a list here. All right, so we have, and actually I have a picture, so I'll go just show you that instead. So different creatures that can help with pollination are, we have bees, we have butterflies, hummingbirds, so some mammals or birds are able to help with pollination, wasps, flies, moths, some bats. Some bats are very small and help with pollination, and they are going to be helping by drinking the nectar and getting the pollen on them. Sometimes they are predators and they're eating some of the other pollinators, and that's how they get over to the plants as well. We have lacewings and beetles. There are a lot of different types of creatures that are helping us with pollination. And how they help is they're not going over and doing what I did, where they pick off the stamen and they're going around to all the plants and they're just helping us by brushing the pollen off on the pistil. What they're doing is they're looking for something from this flower. So this flower is giving them something. They have a reason to be there. And what the flower is giving them is food. Not the pollen. They're not typically eating the pollen, although sometimes they do use that as part of their food source. But what they're doing is they are drinking nectar from the flower. So in the pistil, there's actually nectar, a sweet substance that a lot of these pollinators like to drink and get their energy from. So what happens is our bee would fly around and go to get the nectar. And in the process of getting to the center of the flower to drink the nectar, they're going to bump up against the stamen, and that pollen is going to rub off on their body. And then as they move from flower to flower, they're going to bump up against the stamen and other pistils, therefore rubbing the pollen that is on their bodies onto the pistil, hence pollinating the flower. So oftentimes these animals or these creatures, insects, they are not purposefully trying to pollinate these plants, but in the process of getting their meals, they just happen to be bumping into things, and they are making this process work. Okay. I'm going to put that over there. So like I said, bees are probably the most well-known pollinator. And the reason why is because they are very hard workers. They are very quickly flying from flower to flower to pollinate, well, not pollinate, sorry, to get as much nectar from those plants as possible. And the reason for that is because bees, they live in a community called a colony, and they are responsible not just for the survival of themselves, but for the survival of the entire colony. So the worker bees are going out and they are trying to consume as much nectar as possible, but they're not using the nectar, at least the majority of the nectar, for themselves. They are carrying it back to their hives, and they are passing that nectar off to the other bees that are in the hive in order to store it so that they can make food for other bees in the community, for the young, the babies that are being born, and then also for the colony to survive throughout the winter. So they are not just getting nectar for themselves so that they can survive, they're making sure that their entire community, their colony, is able to survive as well. So as a result, bees, they fly very quickly. They're kind of built for speed. You'll see that they're small, they've got fast wings, they're kind of aerodynamic, and they're able to pollinate or visit 5,000 flowers a day. So they're visiting a lot of flowers. Then if we look at some of the other pollinators, the pollinator we're going to focus on today is the butterfly. And the butterfly is also looking for nectar. The butterfly is going to be getting the nectar with this long proboscis, which is on the front. It kind of unravels, and it's like a straw. It's able to stick that down into the pistil to get the nectar. But you'll notice a lot of differences between the body type of the bee versus the butterfly. The bee is able to fly very quickly and visit lots of different flowers, whereas the butterfly has these larger wings and is able to fly long distances, but doesn't do so as quickly. And the butterfly is really just consuming nectar for itself. It is not like the bee where it needs to store a bunch of nectar for the rest of its community. So it really doesn't have a family per se that it needs to worry about. It just needs to worry about itself. So the bee is the most well-known pollinator because it's visiting so many more flowers in a day to collect as much nectar as possible, where the butterfly is just kind of taking its time, getting enough food for it to survive, and then kind of moving her along. So while the bee is, I guess, the most productive pollinator, the butterfly has some advantages as well in terms of pollination. So a lot of plants actually benefit from getting pollen from flowers or plants that are not so closely related. Meaning, if you have a plant, I'm gonna see if I can draw flowers quickly. If I have a flower and there are flowers around it, the flowers most closely growing to my original flower are most likely direct descendants or relatives of this other flower because they're right next to each other. Flowers, when they drop their seed, it's typically not going to travel very far unless it's unless it's traveling by wind. So these flowers that are all very close to each other are going to be very closely related. Now, if the original flower maybe had a gene or a disease, so I'm going to put a little frowny face on it, and then dropped seed close by that also had this bad gene in it, then anytime these flowers pollinate each other, they're going to continue to get that bad gene. However, if there is another plant, maybe further away, that is not a direct relative of one of those flowers, maybe this flower is stronger and has some better genes. Well, a bee who is visiting this flower patch may just pollinate all these flowers with those lesser genes, whereas a butterfly will travel longer distances and carry pollen from one group of flowers over to an unrelated flower, or the other way around, and we get something that is called cross-pollination, okay? And this helps grow stronger plants. So while the butterfly does not pollinate as many flowers or plants, it does have some beneficial uses where it's aiding in cross-pollination more, okay? So what I wanted to do now is just take a look at the butterfly in a little bit more detail. Now, if we were at school right now, we would, go through and have you guys answer some questions and do some quizzes, but I'm just going to give you some of the information. And then we also at school would typically raise some butterflies from larvae. We can't do that this year. However, I am going to try to do it at home and take videos for you so that you can see the whole process. And then once the butterflies have come to maturity, we'll let them go probably over at the organic farm near us. So we talked about life cycles before, where we looked at just the life cycle of how different animals and plants kind of interact with each other. We looked at the life cycle of the plant with pollination and fertilization. So now what we're going to do is look at the butterfly life cycle. And I'm actually going to show you a picture. It'll be a little bit quicker. So where the butterfly starts is from an egg. Now, an adult butterfly is going to lay eggs, and where they lay the eggs is very important because a lot of times butterflies need a very specific food source. So they will lay the eggs on the leaf of the plant that the grown caterpillars will need to eat. So they would lay it on the underside of a leaf. They're going to try to lay the eggs in a place where predators will not be able to reach it or see it. But there's a lot of eggs that are laid. Once the egg hatches, what will happen is what they're called larvae, or the caterpillar, will eat its way out of the egg, and it will actually consume the coating or the shell of the egg. Once it consumes that, it then immediately starts to consume the plant that the egg was on. We call this the host plant, okay? And that is what the caterpillar is going to eat, because caterpillars can't fly yet, they don't have wings, and so they need to find their food close by. The egg typically takes about, I think it's like 4 days to hatch once the egg is laid. And then the caterpillar is going to eat as much food as it can in a period of about 10 to 12 days. And it's going to try to get as much energy as possible, because the really cool thing about butterflies is that they go through a process of metamorphosis, which means they completely change their body structure. So what happens is this caterpillar will eventually become a butterfly, And you'll notice that their body type is completely different. The caterpillar has many more legs. It does not have wings. And whereas the butterfly obviously has wings, a more slender body, and it does still have 6 legs, but not as many as the caterpillar did. So the process for changing from the caterpillar to the butterfly, like I said, is called metamorphosis. And where it does that and how it does that is through this chrysalis. So once the caterpillar eats as much food as it can and it's ready to change its form, what it does is it attaches itself to a branch, someplace sturdy and safe from maybe the eyes of predators or from the wind or the elements, going to attach itself, and it spins a silk pod, okay? And this pod is called a pupa or a chrysalis. And what happens is that inside this pod, so the caterpillar throughout its life as a caterpillar is going to shed its skin, okay, kind of like snakes do. And the last time it sheds its skin, it's then going to shed and have the beginnings of the chrysalis underneath the skin, and it doesn't grow the skin back. So in that chrysalis, what's happening is that the caterpillar is changing its form. It's growing its wings. The body is actually, I've heard, like liquefied and then regrows into the form of the adult butterfly. So the caterpillar is in the pupa for about 2 weeks. And when it reaches the time where it is a butterfly, what happens is that the chrysalis will split open and the adult butterfly will emerge. But when the butterfly emerges, it's not going to immediately start flying. When it comes out, its wings will be kind of folded, wrinkled, and wet, and it needs to wait until its wings dry out and it pumps blood through its wings in order to straighten them, and then finally it will be able to take flight. And remember, when the caterpillar is growing, it needs the leaves. The host plant is what it's consuming. It has a mouth and it's able to chew through the plant. Once it becomes a butterfly, it no longer has a mouth in order to consume the leaves. So when it's a butterfly, it's going to use that long proboscis that we saw on this page here in order to drink nectar. So its food source changes. So it's going from consuming host plants to consuming the nectar from nectar plants, okay? And that's going to be very important for people like us, where we are trying to build a garden to attract butterflies, because we need to make sure that they have both the host plants and the nectar plants available to them, okay? So what I wanted to do before we go any further is I want to show you this really cool stuffed animal that I got myself this year. So we don't have an egg, but let's assume that this hungry caterpillar has eaten its way through its egg and it is now consuming its host plant. Now this is a monarch butterfly, and our monarch butterflies have a very specific plant that they need to eat as caterpillars, which is the milkweed plant. So our caterpillar is eating milkweed, and it's been doing this for about a week. And so it's gotten very fat and has lots of energy. And so it's going to shed its skin the final time, and it is going to spin its silk pod and suspend itself from a branch to form its chrysalis. So it is going to stay in this chrysalis for a period of about 2 weeks. And in this time, it's going to be changing its form on the inside, and it's going to have a slender body. It's changing its face, and so it no longer has a mouth. It has its proboscis, and it is growing wings. And then after the 2-week period of time, the chrysalis will split open, and out will come our butterfly. And again, at first, the butterfly's wings will be folded and they'll be wet, and our butterfly will not be able to fly. And so it's going to need to dry out its wings, pump blood into the wings so that they stand out more straight, and then finally it will be able to fly away. Okay, so that's my cool butterfly. I love this thing. Very colorful too. All right, So the next thing that I wanted to do was read a quick book about the butterfly. So this is called From Caterpillar to Butterfly by Deborah Heiligman and illustrated by Barry Weissman. Today, a caterpillar came to school in a jar. It is eating green leaves. It is climbing and wiggling. This tiny caterpillar is going to change. It will change into a beautiful butterfly. Caterpillars usually turn into butterflies outdoors. They live in gardens and meadows and yards. But we will watch our caterpillar change into a butterfly right here in our classroom. This change is called metamorphosis. Our caterpillar started out as a tiny egg. The mother butterfly laid the egg on a leaf. The egg is tiny. It is the size of a pinhead. When the caterpillar hatched out of the egg, it was hungry. It ate its way out of its own eggshell. Then it started to eat green plants right away. The mother butterfly lays her eggs on plants that the caterpillar will eat. These are called host plants. A caterpillar's job is to eat and eat and eat, so it will grow and grow and grow. The caterpillar is also called a larva. Each day when we come into school, we look at our caterpillar. Each day it is bigger. The caterpillar eats and grows for 12 to 14 days. Our skin grows with us, but a caterpillar's skin does not grow. When the caterpillar gets too big for its skin, the skin splits down the back and the caterpillar crawls right out of its own skin. It has a new skin underneath. This is called molting. Our caterpillar will molt 4 or 5 times. After many days, our caterpillar is finished growing. It is much bigger than when it first came to school. It is almost as big as my little finger now. Our caterpillar is making a special house. First, it makes a button of silk. That's what attaches it to the branch. It uses this button to hang upside down from a twig. Then it molts for the last time. Instead of a new skin, this time there is a hard shell. This shell is called a chrysalis. Our caterpillar will stay inside the chrysalis for a long time. The chrysalis is also called the pupa. Every day, the chrysalis looks the same. We can't see anything happening, but inside the chrysalis, our caterpillar is changing. The caterpillar stays in the chrysalis for about 1 week. Will our caterpillar ever turn into a butterfly? Will it ever come out of its chrysalis? We can hardly wait, but we do. We wait and wait and wait. Then one day during snack time, somebody shouts, "Look!" and we all rush over to see. The chrysalis is cracking. We see a head, a body, and then wings. It is a butterfly. The tiny caterpillar who came to school in a jar turned into a painted lady butterfly, and we saw it happen. Our butterfly is damp and crumpled. It hangs on to the chrysalis while its wings flap, flap, flap. Blood pumps into its wings. The wings straighten out and dry. Soon our butterfly will be ready to fly. In 2 hours, the wings are dry and the butterfly is ready to fly. Our butterfly cannot stay in the jar. It needs to be outside with flowers and grass and trees and other butterflies. It is a warm spring day. I put my finger into the jar. The butterfly sits on my finger. I pull it out and our butterfly goes free. We feel a little sad and a little happy. We watch our butterfly land on a flower. It will sip the flower's nectar through a long coiled tube called a proboscis. Maybe it is a female butterfly. Maybe someday she will lay an egg on a leaf. I know just what will happen then. That egg will hatch into a caterpillar, and that caterpillar will turn into a beautiful butterfly. Painted lady butterflies sip nectar from certain flowers. They like thistle, burdock, zinnia, butterfly bush, and mint. How many different kinds of butterflies can you find around your neighborhood? Here are some common ones to look for. There's the monarch, which is found in most areas of the United States. The black swallowtail, which is found in areas but usually very far west. The cabbage white, found throughout the United States. The dog-faced butterfly, found throughout the South, and it migrates to the Midwest, the Northeast, and Canada. The common blue, which is found in the West, and the buckeye, which is found most areas of the United States except for the Pacific Northwest. All right, so that's our book. And one of the things that I saw in here, well, first of all, this kind of follows the exact process that we went through last year when we first started raising butterflies at school. And I have to say, it was one of the coolest things to watch when they would crawl along your finger as a caterpillar. And then when they're butterflies, they grab onto your finger with their long legs. And they just sit right on your finger as you lift them out, and then they fly away. So it is very, very fun to watch and see that whole process take place. But then also the other thing is when they leave our habitat that we're creating for them, it does say in here that the butterfly is then, we talked about this a little bit, that the butterfly is then finding flowers to sip nectar from. And in this case, the painted lady was getting the nectar from flowers like the thistle, burdock, zinnia, and butterfly bush and mint. But not all butterflies are able to survive with nectar or the same host plants. So what I have here is I have a list of different plants that butterflies are dependent upon. So a lot of times people think of the monarch butterfly when they're thinking of butterflies and metamorphosis, because the monarch butterflies go through this really cool migration every year where they are in the Northeast where we are, and then they migrate all the way down to Mexico when the weather is cold, and then they come back in their next generation. So it's really kind of cool to see that whole process. But there are a lot of other butterflies in this area as well. So as we talked about, there are host plants, and those are the plants that the caterpillars need to eat when they are first hatched from their eggs. And that is where the butterfly, the adult butterfly, is going to lay the eggs, is on those plants so that the caterpillars will have something to eat. For the monarch, the milkweed plant is the only host plant that they can lay their eggs on. And the milkweed provides more than just food for the butterfly. So milkweed plants are actually toxic to a lot of the predators that would want to eat the monarch butterfly. So when the caterpillar consumes the milkweed leaves, it absorbs the toxins from the plant and then becomes poisonous to a lot of the predators. And so this is a great defense mechanism for the monarch butterfly. The tiger swallowtail is going to rely on different plants as its hosts. It's typically a lot of trees. They're the cherry, ash, birch, and tulip trees. The red admiral is looking for the wild cherry, black oak, aspen, and birch. And then the red spotted purple is looking for cherry, aspen, apple, and willow trees. So a lot of butterflies are looking specifically for these trees, whereas the monarch needs milkweed. And you'll see my shirt here, I say, got milkweed. And in fact, right now I'm desperately searching for milkweed because it's been so cool here that our milkweed hasn't started really growing yet. It is a perennial plant that comes back year after year, but it's just barely coming out from underground right now. And so I'm really hoping we can find some milkweed maybe in a nursery somewhere that we can use for food when our larva gets here in a couple weeks. So fingers crossed. Now, once our caterpillars transform into butterflies through metamorphosis, they need, well, first of all, during the process of metamorphosis, they're very vulnerable. They cannot protect themselves. They cannot move or fly away because they are in the chrysalis. So when they form their chrysalis, they are trying to make sure that they are looking for woody spots to attach to that are sturdy and going to protect them from the wind. And also, oftentimes they're looking for something that is a little bit more hidden so that predators can't see the chrysalis and attack them when they're in that state. When they emerge, they're looking for nectar plants. And a lot of times these nectar plants are very similar across the different butterflies. You'll notice butterfly bush is there for every single type of butterfly on our list. But usually they're looking for flowers that have certain qualities, okay? So flowers, like I said, they want the pollination to happen. They need it to happen. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to fertilize their eggs and produce seeds. So in order to attract these insects or bats or hummingbirds, they need to make sure that they have something that those creatures want. So they are producing nectar. And in order to attract those creatures to the nectar, they often have sweet smells. They have landing pads, which is these petals here. So bees may land or get nectar from different flowers than a butterfly, because a butterfly has long legs and it's able to perch on these long flowers, whereas the bees are able to flap their wings faster and are just hovering. And oftentimes they can get into the smaller flowers like, you know, asters or things like that. So they have their landing pads. Color is also very important. For butterflies, they're actually the only insects that can see the color red. So a lot of times they're looking for, or they're attracted to flowers that have red. Maybe not the entire flower being red, but sometimes there's like almost like a little target pattern on the center of the flower that is basically saying, over here, the nectar is over here. Okay, so scent, color, landing pad, these are all ways, and of course the nectar, these are all the ways the flowers are attracting the pollinators. Okay, so these are the lists. I'm not going to go through every single flower, but here is a quick picture of some of the nectar plants. And we don't plant butterfly bush, which is this big guy right here, in our garden because we don't have enough space. They get very big. But we do oftentimes do sunflowers, liatris, we do marigolds, we do echinacea, daisies, things like that, asters. So these are all flowers that we have in our perennial garden or our butterfly garden at the school. Okay. So I know that's a lot of information for everybody. Typically, we'll go ahead and plant some of these flowers during our class, but I've actually been planting directly into the garden and trying to get our perennial plants ready for the season. So I've uploaded some videos on that process. Feel free to watch them. We've planted already some milkweed in the garden. And pretty soon we're going to start, we planted wildflower, I would say last week or the week before. And then pretty soon we're going to be planting some of our annual seeds, which would be our sunflowers. We have some zinnias, those things, but it needs to be a little bit warmer before we can put those seeds in the ground because we're going to direct sow those. So, so we're moving along quite well right now. Hopefully from this lesson, you've learned a little bit more about pollination and the role that our pollinators play in that process, and how important they are to ensuring that our plants are able to produce seed and the fruits and the vegetables that we need. Usually at this point, I talk to the kids about, because pollinators are so important, we need to make sure that we protect them. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things in our environment that may be negatively impacting them. So what I ask you guys to do is think about that, maybe do a little research on your own about what the current state of our pollinator population is, and what are the things in our environment that could be impacting them, whether it be positive or negative. And in the next lesson, what we'll do is we'll talk about some of those things and talk about what other things aside from the host and the nectar plants that our butterflies need in order to survive, and how we can make sure that they're getting that. So thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you learned some things here. If you were on our class last week, you know that we did do a challenge, excuse me, which we do each week. So this last week's challenge was to make what we call a butterflyer. Sorry, I had a little something in my throat, which is basically a butterfly paper airplane that we asked the kids to go ahead and decorate and send us a picture to seedtoharvest@benhampto.org. Those are due tomorrow by noon, which is May 12th. So if you are watching this before then and you want to get a butterflyer in, on this same playlist on our YouTube channel, there is an instructional video on how to fold that. And you can go ahead and create your own butterfly craft and send that over to us. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you soon.